by sponsor.
Oh my gosh, and we are live. All right, welcome everybody. Episode 3. What an incredible journey we've had so far. Thank you all for joining. I am here today with Flo Murnig. Say hi, Flo. Ciao, ciao. From Austria. And Enrico Baistrocchi. We don't know, man. See, this is why. Thank you guys for joining us. How are y'all doing today? Good?
Very well. May I ask a question from the perspective of the user,
Please.
of the viewer? I'm on the MesaRim YouTube channel. Where is the stream?
Let's click on it.
I do a refresh on the side, on the channel. Okay.
You see it?
Now it's there. Okay, yes. Thank
Perfect.
you. Because then this time, do a refresh. Okay, I watched the thing on YouTube while we are talking.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So today, I guess what we'll be talking about a lot today is just route setting in general, and especially competition route setting, since we have the pleasure here of being joined by Flo. And if you don't know Flo, he's chiefed a ton of competitions, but even more recently, he's worked on the World Championships in Hachioji, which were used to select 8 of the Olympic qualifiers for the Olympics that are now moved to 2021. But really, the goal of this conversation is just to kind of get a little bit of perspective from the interesting relationship that this sport has. And I think not a ton of sports have a situation like this where not only does the athlete kind of have to prepare for a sport in general, but essentially it almost feels like a competition within a competition where the route setters are also like part of this game in creating the field of play for these athletes. And so kind of the first thing that I wanted to open up with is that relationship between setters and athletes and the role that setters play and like the role that you think, Flo, that you play in terms of selecting the kind of athlete that, for instance, gets to go to the Olympics. Like, do you see yourself as kind of you have some power over that, and kind of how do you navigate that, what power you do have, or like how you can influence the decisions and the outcomes of the competition?
Yeah, I would say there is a lot of power in route setting. I mean, we're gonna create the routes which make the decision. So if you're gonna mess it up totally, it's gonna be a lot of ties and same positions. If you're gonna do a very good job, probably the ranking is perfect. There is sometimes the question if we can make the route for a specific athlete. Of course, we could. We know the athletes. We know their weakness and strengths, especially of the top athletes. But it's not our goal to make a route for one specific athlete. It's more or less the goal. I mean, it's not even the goal to have a perfect ranking. In the past years, it's more and more important to have a very good show for the audience, especially for the live TV, and it has to be very, very attractive. So it's pretty difficult to have a good ranking and have a very spectacular route setting, and there is not so much room to make some decision in order to support some athletes or not.
Yeah, I wonder, so you're saying like you know, for a lot of people, and I know here, there's a lot of talk frequently about ranking and making sure that there's good separation. But you're saying another important thing, obviously, is that it's a good show, and that has to do with the audience and what they see. And then there's also probably like that the climb climbs well for the athletes, which is not necessarily the same thing, because sometimes it can climb well for the athletes but not be a good show. And if you talk to them about it, a lot of times they can feel that way. What would be, from your perspective, like, I nailed, like, both sides of the coin, like I nailed it because these things went well, and then from the opposite would be like, this was a disaster, because for instance, like for some people it would be, oh, everybody got ties, like this was a disaster. Or maybe it's like, oh, the show was great, it was a great competition.
There are several sides of the routes. Like Udo can probably agree if I say, from the view of the route setter, the setting could be perfect because we're gonna provide a very good ranking. From the view of a trainer or a coach, could be not as perfect as they want because they cannot see if the athlete could give his best or not. Because we have been focused only on ranking and to get a very good result. But like people like the coaches, they want to see how their athletes perform, and they want to observe them in their strength and weakness and what they can do to improve their athletes. And if the route or the boulder problem doesn't show some weakness or strength of an athlete, probably not as good for the coaches than for the route setters. And as you said, if the setting works very well for the ranking, it could be super boring to watch. If it's very spectacular to watch, it could be a lot of ties because there is a lot of dynamic sections. Probably some people remember the 2019 World Cup in Villars, the final routes. They set a very spectacular round, but as I can remember, there was a lot of ties with a lot of, especially the man route. The female route I can remember, 7 out of 8 were falling.
Of the finals.
Yeah, the final were falling on the same move, and one, I think Janja, she passed that move, was set as a dynamic sequence, but nobody could do it. So it's very tricky to.
Yeah, really difficult kind of to try to navigate. What's your, Udo, what's your like ideal route, or in terms of like what you would like to see in competitions right now, where you're saying, oh, they nailed it? And do you have some examples?
Yeah, that you have to show the broadest skill set, I think, to feel really good about yourself and being maybe world champion. I think the perceived fairness, if you like, when bouldering comes, if you get away with just one skill set, you're really good in a certain kind of dynos, and this is the only thing you have to do. This finals, I think that is perceived as unfair and also not very attractive. You know, I think ultimately the audience, but also the athletes themselves and the coaches look for this kind of perceived fairness. That you really have to be a complete climber, and maybe you struggle, and you also for the spectacle. I think the whole character, you know, that the audience can watch the character of the climber. I think that's also something very attractive, and something the route setters can do really well in, like with certain frustrating elements. You know, like if you have a really hard, the slab is already hard from the ground off, but it's totally a gamble for the setters, since that might be if nobody does the first move, that's very unsatisfying. But on the other hand, if you show some character and you get over it, and then you fall, and then you pull yourself together and finally top the problem, then it's basically the hero's journey that the audience, but also the athlete and the coaches see. So, and it's the same for me, you know, and there's certain, like even, for example, if you ask me for an example in terms of bouldering in 2018, Innsbruck, and there was really, like just from a pure analytical point of view, I found it a little not so nice that everybody who had a zone also had a bonus, also had a top. Nobody fell over the in the entire finals. Nobody fell once they had the zone hold, and that is not ideal. But on the other hand, it was a really satisfying and perfect finals from my point of view, and the strongest one.
From like a separation
again,
standpoint.
Again,
from
it
just
worked
like
nicely from the even with this unfortunate zone thing, you know. But it played out. They still had a distinct winner. So as Flo said, you know, that might be that one aspect is really not very satisfying, but then all the other aspects make up for it.
Yeah, I'm curious for you, for like Enrico and Flo, do you guys enjoy that part of it where you, because I know that's like a tough part to think about, but do you enjoy the part that you have a role to play where you can kind of like be a part of who gets to win, or do you often think like, oh, this is like unfortunate that I have this role and I wish I didn't have to necessarily, because I think that's like a challenge sometimes. In fact, especially like if you were setting for a route where potentially it was going to pick the Olympian, like I think did that play into your head at all, thinking like, oh gosh, I get to select to a certain degree who gets to go, like what if I mess this up?
So personally, of course, I think from my side, I feel more usually the responsibility about, you know, try to set a good comp and try to provide with the team, with the setting team, provide kind of variety and let the athletes express their skills. And so, and of course, trying to have, let's say, to provide a learning experience and a good experience for the athletes and for the coaches, because I think, you know, you can measure yourself in a comp as an athlete, and the coach can measure your performance, and then based on that you can train and you can develop more and more skill to perform the better in the following comp. And so, and usually I don't really feel personally the responsibility about, oh, if I set in this way, I'm gonna make this athlete winning or whatever, because I have the feeling that if you set a pretty good route or a pretty good round of boulder with a certain variety, you're gonna just reward the best climber that day, and who is gonna be the best, who is gonna deserve the winning, I think. Of course, if as Udo was mentioning before, if you're gonna just set in only one style, so the route is gonna be only a very crimpy route with no other very skill test, or if you set a round of boulder with a lot of run and jump dynamics coordination moves, then of course you're gonna start moving kind of your setting into one direction, and so you're gonna start rewarding just a certain category of athlete, so the best in that style. But if you, with your setting team, you work on creating variety, I think you're gonna just reward the best climber that day.
Yeah.
But I would say like even go for it.
I would say like maybe some example that happened last year in Chamonix is regularly you can rely on Yanya to be in the finals, and if you at the beginning of the setting, if you go through the start list, you're going to point out the top athletes you think they can make it to the finals, and it's probably, I mean, you know the top climbers, and they have a fair chance to get to the finals. So we think about what can we do for those athletes to challenge them and to provide a very good route. What happened last year in Chamonix was with the women, Yanya made a mistake in the semifinal, and we prepared kind of a hard route in the final, and it happened. So from 8 finalists, 6 of them have been fairly young ladies, smaller competitors, and very young ones. So there was only Molly and Jessie, a little bit taller, and all the other girls, they were pretty small. So we didn't have any time to change the route or reset the route, because there is some side events like movies and all this stuff. You cannot use the lift a very long time. The only thing we could do is to make the first half of the route easy. You know, the moves that work, the sequence work. So we opened the holes, we made better holes, and it turned out opening the holes was more possibilities to make heel hooks and resting points, and the route looked super easy, and it was until a point with the first hard move, and some girls, I think 2 girls fell before the move, but the other girls were falling on this move, and Jessie, I think she got a plus or whatever. So, but it was a strange situation, because you're gonna think, okay, those competitors are in the finals, and you're gonna set a route for them, and it doesn't happen this way. So you have almost no chance to modify it or get another have another route for another list of starters for the final. And it was totally another like style of competitions climbers than we set the route for.
Yeah, so I think that's like interesting too, because for especially when you get to finals and you start kind of knowing who the people generally are going to be. I mean, I know this has happened frequently too. Whenever you're setting for competitions, there's always the outliers or the perceived outliers, and maybe like Udo Jan could be considered an outlier, especially like I think in the field and lead, and just those outliers to kind of do they play with the role that they play in the preparation for the routes, and saying, oh, maybe like this person's going to be here, like you said, that changed the entire way you were thinking about the route, because the field was different than you thought it was going to be. Like, would you say that he's an outlier, or would you consider like his preparation differently from that point of view, and the setter's preparation different?
Like Jan, are you talking about Jan?
Or just in general, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look close, there are several outliers, right? Someone like Sean McCall, for example, has a really, his strategy is working really well for him, how fast he still climbs. And I was just like in lead wondering, because Flo was mentioning that they get pumped and then they fall, or maybe this was before we were talking. Anyhow, I think like it's difficult to predict how the whole thing plays out. So I don't know if the aspect of an outlier changes so much. Like if you look at Toulouse at the qualifications for the females, when Mia Krampel just did one more move, and the rest was all decided by time. So they have so many, the setters, from my point of view, they have so many aspects to juggle with that I think that the outlier is the least on their list of things they have to consider. I would think.
Or so I guess kind of going back to what we were talking about originally, because Enrico, you pointed out maybe if it's a well-rounded round, then the best climber is going to win. But I would say even like your definition of a well-rounded climber is going to maybe be different from Flo's definition of well-rounded climber. And I mean, certainly like a lot of the competitors' definition of a well-rounded climber, depending on who you ask. And I think it's just interesting as that definition changes, and especially like I know for me, setting wise, the definition of like a well-rounded climber has progressed over time. How the style has been changing. What do you guys see as like the style right now for what's going to make a climber be really successful in the current like setting style, and like what's a good well-rounded climber?
So yeah, to me right now, I think, of course, you know, we are so through the setting, through the coaching, because it's very interesting to me. Now I'm setting since a long time, and of course, the style and the comp style change a lot according with you know, the dimension of the walls, the audience, the live streaming. So it's very spectacular, a lot of coordination involved. But luckily, I think right now, a good overall climber is a climber making decision fast, and usually being able to, talking about boulder, learning in a try, learning a lot from the boulder problem, and try to, you know, achieve the movement in the following try. So pretty much I would say I'm very happy that I can see better athletes right now in the climbing field, and better athletes, in my opinion, they're gonna be for sure better climbers. So when I'm talking about athletes, I mean an overall athlete. So very high level coordination, very, of course, you know, overall strength, body wise. We are not looking at the classic old school climber from the 90s, you know, very, very strong on the finger, but there was not too much relate to coordination, technique, balance. And so I think right now, an overall climber is mostly a good athlete, and luckily with the setting, we can test a lot of different skills.
Do you guys think you agree with that? Do you guys think that the setting is like going too far? I know a lot of people are saying like there's too much parkour, especially.
Oh,
yeah.
Sometimes, but the thing is, as a route setter, you have to be one step ahead in a point of view, like you have to challenge the athletes and you have to challenge the audience, because if you're gonna set the same over and over again, it probably becomes to be a little bit boring from the style. So there was these milestones in setting, the first triple dyno in bouldering, the skate, all these special techniques came up with when route setters went crazy and tried something they never tried before, and they're not quite sure if it works or not, because it works for them. If you come up with a new sequence, you're gonna set it, you try it, and probably you spend 2 days with this one sequence, and you don't know if it works, if some athletes have just a couple of minutes to try it or even to on-site it. So you're gonna have a big risk you put on the wall, and if this works or not, you don't even know if it's gonna be a disaster or if it works out. But without those setters who went into this big risky situation, the sport couldn't evolve in a way it did in the past, I think.
this argument with a parkour style, and in general, like even in lead, like I think what people, maybe there's a little bit conservative approach there, that they try to have climbing as it was in the 80s, and I mean that's a fair argument, but I think in for climbing as a sport, the genie is out of the bottle, and the thing that really changed over the last years, and will certainly change for the next years, is the timing for the climbing movement is so much more important than it used to be. Like say in the 80s, the timing was almost not an issue really. It was more about like what you did and how you did it, and not so much in what sequence you did these things. And and there's also this element that exactly that, to do exactly that, to be really precise and really fast, is just very, very difficult to do. And it's very challenging on your that mental preparation, how you go about your mental preparation. But I think this is really something that is here to stay, because every challenging movement has an element of timing. Otherwise it's just like even long distance running. If you don't find your rhythm, like, or even cycling, you want to have a nice smooth rhythm, how you cycle. So and complaining that about this more dynamic style. It's a little bit like hoping that this element of timing is not there, because really that's the first thing that crumbles too. If you're nervous and if you're a little bit tight, your timing goes down the drain. And from my point of view, like when we're asking, is the setting going too far? I think we only see the beginning right now. I think it will get a lot faster and a lot more decisive for the future.
I really appreciate a lot of the, I think the timing part of it is really good. One of the part where I do think I don't like this style of setting so much in the bouldering is like the really, really large sideways distances that are covered. Like I appreciate a lot more of like those, because you can have the same kind of timing movement and nuances. I think that's like the spectacular thing. If you see a climber like cover 15 feet sideways in like a couple of seconds, then that's pretty spectacular, which is a lot harder than like if they do a move that's more vertical in nature, but it requires the toe to do something and the arm to do something. Totally. But it's a lot harder to, I think it's harder for like somebody who doesn't know that, how to catch that.
The tricky thing with the difference in setting between going sideways or going upways is sideways is probably more fair for everybody, for taller or not so tall people. The dangerous thing is setting something upwards is always realized to taller people may find it easier than smaller people, but going to the left or to the right side, probably more fair. So that's for sure one reason.
I'm reminded a bit, like, I don't know, for me, and I think Tomo even like posted a meme of himself on this, but it was like, maybe it was Meiringen World Cup Finals, Bouldering World Cup Finals or something, where it was on blue volumes, and
yes,
and it was
that
like,
was a fantastic. I was just about, this is a fantastic problem.
Yeah.
If you can show this, you think you will find it?
Was it in Meiringen?
Going up, was with a hook. Yes, I just forgot if it was the first problem. No, I think must have been like the second or third.
Well, problem. The one you're talking about is the one where I'm saying like, maybe it's like the toe catch with the press. That's the one that you're talking about. But I'm talking about, there was one where there was one in that same season where they dynoed like quadruple paddle sideways, but then Jakob Schubert ended up just kind of like reaching and climbing it.
That was the Meiringen before.
That was the Meiringen before.
It was in 2018. 2019, but this problem was when I talk about timing, and I was just like thinking, is this really true? Because in this problem was just going up, when Flo mentioned that it's more fair to go sideways for the different sizes, but this problem, I think only Tomoa and Adam did it.
This was the
this
one that
this is 2018, right?
Yeah.
This is 20.
To me, like when I think about it, maybe if it's going too far, that one a little bit, I'm like, okay, maybe we're going a little bit too far. But
yeah,
there
but
was,
especially if it can be solved, and it was actually really easy for those guys to do it just
to do it
Jakob
statically.
did, and
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's very unfortunate. I mean, this comes with the setters trying something, so that's really risky. But if this happened, you cannot be very happy about this. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, to me, I really appreciate when the setters take risks, even if it doesn't. I think because I think that's also an issue, like you were saying, Flo. If you don't have setters that are taking risks, especially on the bigger stage, where the stakes feel really high, then because I think most setters, if they know the field really well and do their job really well, could set a conservative, competition where they're going to get good separation and a good result that way, but maybe then the sport isn't going to evolve. Would you agree with that? Yeah, so it's like maybe the risk is there, and a lot of times it's hard to,
I would
especially
say the risk is always there, even if even if you don't take a risk and don't set anything new, the risk is there until the competition finish and you see the total result and how everybody moves through boulder and routes. There is the risk level is always very high.
Yeah, I think so. From my point of view, talking about sometimes the risk, I'm with Flo talking about you can set kind of conservative, a good variety round without pushing too much with new moves, whatever. But I like to say that sometimes as setters, we can do our job pretty well, but we need every time to be a little bit lucky that the field and the athletes are going to perform at their best too, because especially in a boulder round, an athlete or one of the 2-3 strongest athletes in the field, they can be maybe piss off, or they can just lose their motivation or their focus on the first boulder problem, and so finding themselves going down and then not be able to perform on a boulder, and then maybe the boulder was kind of perfect, but the climbers that they were supposed to succeed on it or do their best on it, they show up on boulder number 2, boulder number 3 in a bad mindset, and the boulder is not going to work, and then maybe from the audience or from the other side, people, oh, this boulder was too hard, was too much, and then was just sometimes was too hard for what was going on for the athletes at that moment. Yeah. Or, same final, you set a final, and then 3 of the potential finalists are not in final because of a mistake in the semi. You got unlucky as a setter because you didn't really do a mistake, you just got unlucky.
I think this is like a really interesting part of our sport, that essentially, like we're talking about, like you're making a lot of decisions as a setter at some point that are kind of similar to what the athletes have to do at some point in time. Is like we have to decide if you want to take a risk because this could potentially not go well. You don't know exactly how the competition is going to go. It's kind of changing it to you, Udo. So like speaking of preparation for the athletes, you've worked to prepare a lot of athletes for these competitions. How much do the different stages, like if a World Cup's happening in Munich versus a World Cup happening in China, like how much do you take into consideration the setting, the who is chiefing it, like the holds that they're using, all that to help your preparation?
I think it's safer to prepare for not having gaps, in your preparation. I think if you're really very rarely, like maybe for World Championships, you could consider that if you know the wall and you get really specific about a certain setter. But that might work or might not work, because it's always the chief setter you're expecting to set the problem of your athlete, which might not be the case. You know, you can your athlete can fail on something that the head setter didn't even watch a whole lot. You know, it gets set by somebody else. So I think that's too risky and also too specific, and it's also not good pedagogy. I think, you know, like it's the same as a competitor, especially when you're lucky in a certain kind of bouldering parkour style competition. You can win with just a very limited but very up to date, very fashionable skill set. No, but you might not be the best climber. You just know this one skill set successful. So as a coach, you want your athletes to go out there and be ready for everything, like and also in any respect. And like if you're talking really high level, of course, the athlete has to be somehow tough to deal with additional stress of the competition. Now, if they tighten up, because suddenly they're in the finals and they usually climb really smoothly, but under stress, not so much anymore. So they get tired more quickly. So it's more about that, the preparation part.
And that goes back to kind of what Enrico was saying, where the better athletes are going to be more well-rounded in that sense of prepared for like all the different styles, which is interesting. I would have thought maybe there would be some level of, I'm wondering how successful it would be to be like at some level, you know, this head route setter and kind of like what they think is a good climber.
Surely, as I said, like especially I think for the World Championships, that's more because then it's also the hosting nation, you know, usually has a little bit more knowledge about the shapes, you know, the available holes. That's all getting more streamlined and ultimately, hopefully, more fair. Like for the Olympic Games, for example, the holes were already communicated. I think that's a good thing, and but. I mean, in some World Cups, there's a limited set of holes. And if the hosting nation knows the wall and the holes that they're going to use, and also the setters, of course, that makes a difference. And I think this specific preparation mainly happens then. But still, I still find it a little risky, because also like what you're telling your athletes is to prepare really for quite a narrow playing field, you know, and then if it's not so narrow or something else is addressed in their skill set, they're unprepared. And I think if they feel confident before that you prepared so well, to cater the certain style of setting, I think that will even pull them down even more, you know, because they arrive confidently and then they see it doesn't work. So this is what I mean with the pedagogy of it.
Yeah.
The psychology of it.
So one thing I think, like even just talking about that, what's interesting is like the virality of movement now, because you see even on Instagram, basically like everybody, you can kind of track it. You'll see like this move gets done in this competition, and then you'll see that it gets done in like a different competition. And for you, Flo, where are you pulling most of your inspiration for your setting out of, or is it coming from anything in particular for competitions?
One interesting thing is probably the evolution of climbing holds. So a big inspiration comes from a new set of holds arrive in the market, or something we get as a test piece for play with. If you see competitions like 10 years ago, and you're gonna watch or take a closer look on the holds we had back in the day for setting, it turned out it was a different style than we set now, because the setting now is based on very different holds, and some sequences we can set right now very fast was more or less impossible or very, very hard in the past. For example, skate without double texture, or like the boulder we had before with Tomora, just a very coordinative sequence would have been not possible to set it back in the day. So with those new holds, which were mainly from the top brands which were making holds right now, they are inspired by some idea they have in their mind. Like, for example, I know Laurent Laporte from Cheetah, and he's having some very, very crazy ideas in his mind, but the holds he would need for this sequence are not already on the market. So he's trying to shape the holds in order to realize his ideas and sharing those ideas with other route setters. So this is one point. Another point is just a very important point is to work with athletes and try to set something and observe them, how they're gonna move, how they're gonna climb on these problems, and learn what they are capable of doing in a short amount of time, and how to push the limits, how to get out more dynamic, more timing, more power, whatever. I think it's pretty hard if you're not working with the athletes directly, or having a knowledge of the scene. And this is also a big part is Instagram. If you take a look on the videos they post, you're gonna get a brief overview of what's possible and what's not possible. What is their training right now, because they cannot be a part of the training of every top athlete. But in my case, I'm living in Innsbruck, and the climbing gym, I can go there every day and watch them climbing, and I can see a widespread of nationalities climbing there, and what they're gonna climb or what they can't climb. So inspiration comes one side from the holds. The other side is from just observing the athletes and talking with other route setters, trying something, and so you can come up with new ideas to challenge them a little bit more.
And I think it's pretty, like, you can tell too from the setting, climbing on setting that's been inspired by the holds definitely feels different than something that's been inspired by another climb. Like it's especially right now with Instagram, like if you can see the wall angle and like the holds that are used, and since everybody has the holds, you can almost be like, I can set that, I know I have that hold and do that. But I think it is really cool. I imagine the volumes really change setting completely, just because the way they changed the dimensions of the walls, and it definitely made it, like, obviously making it way more three-dimensional, because even within the context that you're giving of a wall, you can start kind of like getting some planes of climbing that you wouldn't have gotten to play with beforehand.
Yeah. I think one aspect though is that on Instagram, at least that's for me, is you don't get. I see many videos on Instagram look like really attractive route setting, but it doesn't mean that they're really that they have to be climbed like this. Whereas the competition route setters, especially on the IFSC level, they are capable of making it much more subtle than it would show on Instagram. Like if you just have a little Instagram video of like Tomoa doing something, I think you're absolutely not aware of the subtleness that goes into this problem, and the little impulses that are in his hip or maybe even in his big toe. that make the move possible. And also from the setting, I think that's a little bit skewing the perspective of many setters right now, because like just in the Instagram video, it looks exactly the same. But then if you're a climber of tomorrow's capability, you could do this look-alike problem really, really, really easily. Because it lacks this the subtleness, or they miss that with a certain impulse, Tomorrow can turn this in an undercling that a less capable climber cannot do. And I think in so far, like if this is your only advice, what you see on social media, you absolutely can't be aware of the subtleness of modern setting.
Yeah, and I think again, yeah, it's very common to see, that's another point, to kind of set a move, expect a move, but then see a very high level athlete express his skills and climb it in a different way that maybe is way cooler than the move you were expecting to set. That's pretty classic. Happened to me a lot of time. I was setting a move and then an athlete was climbing the problem in a very cool way cooler than the way I was expecting. And so I think it's a game. I think when you set, of course you can expect and you can try to set a move, but sometimes I think it's just anatomy and boxes, and distances between the holds that can allow athletes to do a problem in 2 or 3 different ways, just according with their skills, because in the end, we have just 2 hands and 2 feet. There's nothing more. If the distance between an hand and a foot is the same, you can play around it, and so find yourself in solving the problems in a different way and maybe more functional. And the blue problem we were looking at before, to me, was pretty cool in that comp, because different athletes, different skills and different character, and they approach the problem in a different way. So for me, was Jerny Kruder that was so committed, just show up, boom, because his skills is very good in that, and so it was no doubt about doing a super mega triple clutch, But Jakob maybe was a little bit less confident, and then okay, let's bring the problem on my side, and maybe I'm gonna solve it in a less cool way for the audience, but pretty cool for me in terms of the final result, And I think that's the problem on Instagram too. A lot of setters, I think for ego too, they really like to post, oh, look at this problem, and they climb it in a very cool way, but probably you can already tell that you can climb in 3, 4 different ways, and probably we are just looking at the cool way, not the most efficient way, maybe. So yeah, it's challenging, it's fun.
And here, I got it. And I think that just goes for Instagram in general. Like people tend to show the best version of whatever they're doing, and for setting, I think it's no different. And I think for me, it's always kind of, whenever you see videos like that, like you're saying, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, because you're not exactly sure how it's going to climb, but it can get your head thinking about movement in different ways. The other thing I was kind of going to ask about that in terms of the holds, or like you're talking, Flo, in terms of maybe holds are going to change a little bit, and I'm curious what you guys think the direction of hold shapes, and so that we're able to set something maybe that we're not seeing right now. Like dual text is becoming more and more common volumes, or is there anything, like Enrico, you're working with hold companies, and I think both of you are, so maybe some things that are different that are going to change how the setting is done?
I think like this, every year there is new holds you see or touch for the very first time, and for me it's always for some holds the wow effect, which I'm thinking, okay, finally it's possible to set something. It was not possible, at least on my side, to do it the year before, and I don't know. I was setting in Chamonix 3 times now, and it was kind of the event when Cheetah announced a new series of holds, and we have been the first setters playing with those holds. And you're gonna get some tools or toys to play with for the very first time. And this brings up new inspiration. And it surprised me every year, how many hold companies will come up with their ideas, and year after, some of those companies doesn't even exist anymore, because I think the hold market is very, very difficult to get a place in. And like the top leading companies right now, they have very good ideas in the past, and they changed the setting a lot. And for me, it's always interesting how they come up with new ideas every year. So, but as Udo said, it's just the beginning. So I think we can expect more and more crazy holds, or holds which you can set more different things, more new sequence-based things, rely into timing and coordination. I think it's going to be very interesting in the next years.
What I really like is the aspect of how, from the audience point of view, of how you perceive a boulder problem or entire climb. Like, for example, when I first saw this crater, I don't know how the hold is called, that you can build hexagons from, and it looks very often, it looks, how are they called?
Ruti di Bosco.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first time I saw them, I maybe it was just myself, but I thought, oh, they look really big, and I think that makes a huge difference of how the audience, or even the climbers and the coaches, perceive something, and it has different elements to it. Like if you come out and you see something that looks really impressive, almost as if it can't be done, that's one thing. But it can be also the opposite, that you think, oh, that can't be a World Cup problem. Like on these quadra holds, for example, I have seen, like for me personally, I looked at some problems and I was like, wow, that must be certainly a mistake, that looks really easy. But then the way it unfolded was a very complex and maybe the hardest problem. And so that's really interesting. And one aspect, at least for me, is like, for example, in the Cheetah volcanoes, you can't really tell how sloping they are inside, but there's certain arrangements where you can really, from the audience, you can see exactly what's going on. You can see how good the contact point is. I mean, as far as you can see without feeling it, beyond or within those limits. But I think that's a really interesting element of it, and again, it can go both ways, that you're really surprised of how hard or how difficult it is, and this element of how well you see what is actually going on. Like, for example, a toe hook inside a roof, that can't be seen. It might be interesting to climb, it might be very challenging to climb, but if the audience doesn't see it, it takes a little bit, there's one opportunity lost from my point of view. So I really like these problems that you can get a good impression of from the audience point of view.
It is really hard to as a route setter too, to also highlight, not just like set something that's going to get a good result, but also highlight how hard the athletes are working too, because the more subtle it is, maybe something like here's the version of the problem we were talking about, which is a little bit different, but I'd say in terms of like requiring the same skills that maybe the other problem had of timing and getting everything right. Is this the climb you were talking about?
Yeah, that's my favorite, one of my absolute favorite problems of all times, because this really had all, like it gets a lot easier from there on, I think. At least Tomoa and Adam didn't tell, at least it looks less complex, but we to the blue hold, to the second last blue hold, that sequence is fantastic. I think.
And if you watch him
like
climb
so
it,
much.
It's like hard to, just from watching him climb, like there's so much going on, but it's so hard to tell that what he's doing is really, really difficult. And I think like the one way that you can tell that how hard it is this context from the other climbers, because if you watch them try
Yes,
it, like,
absolutely.
yeah. So one thing, kind of going into the hold conversation a little bit more, seeing as how most of these holds are kind of being shaped, like you were mentioning earlier, with competition setting in mind and setting this new movement, and how so many setters, like that's their background. I'm curious, Flo, I don't know how much you're setting commercially, but it's bleeding into gyms for just like normal setting for the public, and your opinion on like how they perceive it. And for instance, like I know I hear this a lot in terms of like, oh, that's a really compy, the climbing at that gym is really compy, and like it's a competition style in comparison to, you know, what they might be looking for or what they might be used to.
It's really interesting for me, and I do a lot of commercial setting as well. But it seems like whenever there is a very interesting set of holds in a IFSC competition or in a big competition, which is live TV or whatever, it seems it's also very interesting for just gyms setting commercial boulder routes. So all those very attracting companies having only competition holds are very popular in just a regular commercial gym as well. And the owner or the operator of the climbing gym in Innsbruck had a very good sentence or a very good description for this. He said, like, imagine you're going to buy a car and you go to the car shop, and regularly customer can just buy a moderate or a cheap car, but it's pretty nice to see a sport car in there, like a very expensive car. You can touch it, probably you can try to get in the car, but you never will buy it and you never can afford it. But it's nice to see it there, it's nice to watch it, and you're gonna stop there just to take a look. And probably it's the same in a climbing gym. You have to have these expensive holds just because people probably never climb on those holds. Probably it's just a very expensive showcase, but it's attracting to them. And a beginner doesn't feel a difference between a very, very expensive hold and a cheap hold. It's just a matter of climbing a little bit, getting into the sport, and a very advanced climber can have a profit of expensive holds, even especially if he trains for a competition. But most of the people climbing in the gym, they probably don't touch the very expensive holds, but they are very attracted by them.
And for me, honestly, yeah, I think one very cool thing talking about cars, one very good thing, the new, let's say the comp style holds and the comp holds they're bringing in the gym is the same of, you know, you study the brake system of a regular car to the Formula One, you know, 20 years ago, the same brake system of 20 years ago of the Formula One, now they are applying regular cars. So there's a development. And I think the coolest part, the climbing comp holds are bringing in the commercial gym is the tridimensionality and the directionality. So they are making pretty much, I would say, sometimes the climbing a little bit more fair and less grip strength related. Because of course, if you are navigating in the middle of a big volumes, fiberglass volume, that they are sticking out of the wall. They're making the climb more relate to balance and movement and flexibility. And of course, not only classic down pulling strength. And same for, the dual text hold. I think they're very interesting for a regular audience because, of course, you got punished if you put the foot in the wrong spot, or you would like to do something but you cannot, and so you have to move around. And I think this is the coolest part in the comp holds, because we can see them, of course, in the gym because they are very good looking, very nice looking. But in the end, I think from my side as a coach too, they are very functional for people, for climbing. And yeah, and of course they can make people feeling very good in climbing and finding themselves in situation very similar to a comp, but way easier.
Yeah, and it seems like the holds are also asking a lot more of like normal climbing gym members, like that are climbing on this stuff. It's asking them to be like more well-rounded, like you were saying, than they would have had to been before if the holds were just kind of in-cut crimps, which I think is really cool. Like if you go into even if you're climbing something that's relatively easy on volumes, it feels pressy and it feels much more different, and it's like it's awesome from a setting standpoint to be able to set something that feels unique like that for like at a really easy level. It's like harder to do sometimes just because it maybe in the past, like you only have jugs or you only have finger buckets, and that's like the only way you can kind of make the terrain different. But I really appreciate like those holds spilling into the commercial setting, and I think especially at Mesa we have a lot of that stuff, and it's like in the main gym and it just gets set with everything else. And like it's cool that you can see it in the World Cup and then be able to climb on it at some point. And in particular, like if you can bring it to the like most approachable level possible.
Can you talk about your spray wall?
Which one?
Because it's quite. I don't know. It's a new one. Like because
the newest
like
one we
traditional, like even what Adam has is mainly fairly small holes, right? Like most, especially the private walls, have lots of rather small holes because the big ones are so expensive, and also you feel that there might be even single use. And but what we have playing with at your spray wall, when in winter, it was obviously not the same wall, but I think there was some nice idea how you get a lot of purchase from even one hold.
Is it this one that you're talking about?
How you, I don't. Yeah, probably.
The one that like most recently that we put up.
It's your wall. I know where,
Yeah.
where it sits, but I haven't been there.
Yeah, so I mean, this started as like we were just trying to put all the most expensive holds in the academy on one wall.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and I think, isn't it that, I mean, first of all, this wall is probably really expensive the way it is right now, right? That's one thing, but also I think many climbers, even if they had unlimited budgets for their walls, they would be maybe concerned that, again, that, there's only one way how to use this certain expensive hold. But in fact, it works out really nicely for you, right? That even with some of the huge holds, you still can make up lots of problems with this one hold.
And there's, I mean, I don't know, you can't really tell from this picture, but we also, maybe some people will cringe at it, but there's a lot of screw-ons also on the holds. Like I know Enrico.
I'm just laughing right now just because. Yeah. No, it's okay. I was thinking about Flo. Usually, the first thing he does just to demonstrate who is the alpha setter is just he shows up and he's just screw on a foot chip on the most expensive hold just to establish his kind of leadership, not only in front of the other setters, but with the gym owner. Usually pretty.
The silverback setter just pounding his chest. It's like, oh, this
Yeah,
is,
but I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
yeah,
Like,
me too.
if this is for training, you have to be really specific. And again, that you have to be very subtle. And if this means that you have to screw a chip on a $500 hold, so be it.
Show me the most expensive hold, and then let me
I'm
jib.
gonna-
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
jib it.
No, but the goal, I mean, the goal with this wall, which I think it was awesome. Not to mention, like when we first started setting it, and shout out to Tristan because he was like when he first started putting the holds on it. It's like a really different mental exercise in terms of how you normally set. From like a setting standpoint, it's really hard putting a hold on. I mean, you could just throw it on and be like, that's good enough. But a lot of times we'd put something on and we'd be like, no, we'd put more holds around and be like, that's not quite right. And then take it off. So like mentally, it was a very different in terms of just like figuring out how you wanted to put the orientation. And it's like a work in progress. So people are climbing on it and then you realize like it's not working well. But the main goal of the wall was like that different wrist positions and hand positions, basically just as weird as like the positions could be, and that the holds can't be engaged without like getting into a good body position. And really it was awesome because even like the really young kids, 6-8-year-old kids, like you can't really make a bad move on the wall. You could go from like the closest hold to the next hold and it's probably going to be like really physical on your shoulders, and because you have to get some sort of opposition from a foot or something to make it work. So it was really fun. Obviously, again, it's like this wouldn't be possible without the holds and the volumes. So it's hard to like say, yeah, just do this at home. But I think the takeaway of doing something at home is like trying to, for me, one of the things that I notice, especially in competitions nowadays, is like really compromised positions that you're grabbing things from. So like under clings above your head that require like a lot of mobility in your wrist and being able to engage it. And the sooner you can engage it, the better off you're going to be. And I think it's like hard to prepare for that stuff unless you just have things that are not quite right. Like, like things aren't pulling in, they don't feel like they're in the right direction. So that was the idea of this wall.
And I mean, there's one thing, especially now in this situation, like you don't have an unlimited budget, but you have the place to build up a wall, overhanging wall like this. You can still do a lot with just regular wood that you might want to grind. And a friend of mine, this is a long time ago in the 90s, he went into a forest and got roots, and grind with a belt sander, sanded them down, and then you have some really, some of them were not so nice to hold, but you can get a lot of purchase if you just be a little bit creative. You don't need yeah.
Have you ever been to Clem's basement?
Clem's basement.
Is that you were talking about some like really that's a good name for a gym. Clem's basement.
Did you see the stones he took from the river, the very washed out rounded stones?
Yeah. And no,
this was one of the most stunning training walls I've ever seen. Like in an aspect, probably it doesn't even look old school right now. It was a very specific, super hard setted training wall. Incredible. It just basically took stones from the river, washed out, very bad friction, very round, glued them on a wood plate and screwed them on the wall. And something very good for me was all the footholds, very small foot chips. He put kind of a cover on top, like a small roof. So he had to step precisely on the hold on a very polished foothold, even more precisely. So this is something they trained in the 90s, but would still work very perfect for a home training wall.
Yeah, and I think this, you shouldn't be discouraged if you don't have the budget for the latest holes. You can really do a lot with being creative in this
Yeah, and also,
respect.
yeah, I mean, even when we're talking about, I think people, like most people, have the tendency to kind of like put the holds. I mean, it depends also what you're training for, but like a lot of people have the tendency to kind of have the holds arranged in like a Vitruvian man, kind of where everything's pulling in towards your center as it goes outside from you. So like basically neutral wrist position, and just playing around with what people think is comfortable. Because I know when I start setting something, if I have like an underclean here and I have to kind of get under it, it's like that took me for a long time. I'm like, that's just uncomfortable and doesn't feel good. But then you're like, oh, okay, well, let's just do it, and it feels bad. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's like I just wasn't used to it. Like now I kind of grow, you start to enjoy it a little bit.
Yeah, what Flo's just said, one thing that's really a low-hanging fruit is that thinking about the footholds, now especially if you prepare for rock climbing, I mean for real rock climbing. And like I have a concrete wall. Unfortunately, it's dark now, and it's I wouldn't reach, but I'll show you next time. And it's a concrete wall, one wall. It's just that vertical. And I just went, because I'm really lazy, I just went with a 20 millimeter screw in there. And so you have these tiny pockets. And recently, since I'm homebound, I climbed a bit more on this wall again. And it's so hard if you're used to plastic footholds, you know, regardless, even like the most advanced dual friction, like really difficult to stand on, but you don't get the sensation of really having to put a lot of pressure on a very small space. And it's really depressing how much my feet hurt. And also there's certain muscles just on the side of your lower leg that I cramp from time to time. So I have sensations that I didn't climb on this wall so much because we have really cool boulder gyms close by. But now I really think I would miss something if I try to prepare in these regular gyms for hard rock climbing.
Yeah, and I think the holds conversation that we had earlier cuts both ways. So it lets you do some certain things, but also like the shoes that work well in those holds right now are maybe a little looser and flatter, and that's like very different from really hard edging and like the muscles, the structure of your foot needs to work differently.
Yeah, but even that, I think, like especially for the young generation that didn't do a whole lot of rock climbing or didn't take it seriously. That's the other thing. I think like many of the kids climb fantastically on rock too, but they don't put the same amount of energy behind it as like old times rock climbers. And so of course there's a certain threshold where you don't push yourself. You know, if a hold is really nasty to stand out and even painful, then you won't deal with it in many cases. Whereas this older generation really had to deal with it. And of course, there's a quality in that, in dealing with these holds. Yeah, and I remember like you're just making it sound as if stiff shoes are the solution, but if you get it right, you know, you're constantly struggling with just deciding if there's an element of pulling on your foot, which totally benefits from soft shoes, or it was more important to have stiff shoes. And I remember when and even like Adam recently mentioned this again. So much thoughts go into what kind of shoes they pick. And of course, there's an element, if you can have this in your training already, that's certainly a good thing. You know, like if you really have to put a lot of thought into the shoes you're wearing in your training, that's fantastic. Even if it's frustrating.
Flo, do you have a wall at home, or have you been climbing? Are you able to climb at home, or?
In Innsbruck, I don't have a wall. I have a regular apartment with a hangboard, Beastmaker. That's it.
Required reading.
What was
Do you? Actually, from a route setting standpoint, because I asked this question to Enrico the other day too. Like, I don't know how long you've been out of like not being able to set, but how much you're missing setting. Are you enjoying the break right now, or are you kind of itching to get back to route setting?
Both. a bit. Like, no, I miss setting. I miss it a lot, but seems like Austria is at least another 2 or 3 months nothing to do for me. So I have to get along with that. But I miss climbing, of course, and setting, yeah, a lot. It's kind of a big part of my life. It's not even a job. It's kind of, I can say it's kind of a lifestyle. Like climbing itself, it's part of my life, and I'm happy to combine it together and to get paid for it. But yeah, it's anyhow a tough situation right now. The lockdown in Austria, and part of Austria I'm living now, is pretty hard, and it's a little bit and hard.
Uh-oh. We might be losing you. I think your internet connection might have you froze up a little bit. But the other because Enrico and I were talking about this earlier too, and I know Enrico kind of went a little crazy without being able to set something. For me, one thing that I noticed now that I haven't been able to set for a while is that I used to have ideas, like most of my ideas came at night while I was sleeping. It was like, unfortunately, 3 a.m. and I'd wake up and be like, oh, I really want to do this thing with this hold. But then the nice thing was that the next day I would be able to go into the academy and like, I have the hold, and then I'd put it on the wall and able to try it. And then you find out, oh, like I actually was crazy, because sometimes when you're at 3 a.m., like you're crazy and you're not actually thinking correctly. But I miss that a lot. And so actually lately what I've been doing is drawing the problems. Like every once in a while I'll get a notebook and I'll start drawing it. And even things like that, I'm like, oh man, a lot of people could actually just benefit from doing that. And like you learn a little bit about the spacing and kind of laying it out. And so with the kids recently, we've been doing kind of online Zoom classes for setting, and it's hard because I don't have a wall here, but I'm like, let's draw some boulder problems, and like this is the move that you're going to try to draw. And that's been pretty fun because I miss it a lot. Like I haven't been able to get that itch out of my head that I have at night when I'm like thinking about a climb. Enrico said a nice
remember 2 years ago we did this at the academy, where we had like printouts of a wall at the academy, and then we asked the kids to draw their dream problems. We told them that this is the only wall they can take on a remote island where they're stuck for the next years, and so they have to come up with ideas how to make it entertaining for them. And we had them not even looking at the wall, but just the printouts and draw a little project of theirs.
Yeah,
I think again that's really valuable. Now, there's even if, and I think it's especially valuable if you realize that how far off you were in your dreams, between dreams and reality. You know, like if you have a home wall, a little home wall, it's an interesting challenge to set or define yourself boulder problems without even looking at it, just from your memory. I think that's interesting. But also if you think about projects you might have and do lots of visualization.
And it's challenging for a lot of people. I've noticed like really there's the kids that are good at on-siting also have I mean, this is totally anecdotal, but I feel like a lot of the kids that are really good at on-siting that we work with, also, if you put them in front of a blank wall or a wall with a lot of holds on it, like a spray wall, they're much better at like quickly coming up with a boulder for themselves on it. Whereas like sometimes you'll put some of the kids in front of a spray wall and they'll freeze up. There's just too many options. And so I think it's a really good, any sort of thing like this where you're drawing like a climb, you have to exercise that ability to put something out, and it could be pretty bad. And I think that's like definitely what I'm missing a lot from Routesetting is just the drafting process, the putting something up and it isn't quite right, but you start heading down an idea. How are you feeling, Enrico? Are you going crazy? You enjoying the break, or are you ready to start setting again?
No, honestly, yeah, honestly, I would love to set as usual every day. I think, as I was mentioning, one of the reasons why I put up my little board was mostly because I was needing to move my hands and do stuff. Because again, I really like the worker part in setting. You know, I consider myself a worker too, so I really like to use my hands to work, and of course the creativity part is very interesting too. And yeah, I'm used to imagine sequence or to put up sequence and then climb on it, because it's one of the most important part in my setting process. It's just imagine the movement, and I want to climb on it, so I have to put the holes on the wall. So that's pretty much what I like to do.
Enrico, like we looked at your wall the last time we were chatting. So how is the process there? Are you happy? How did you change it already?
No, I'm pretty happy, because just to kid a little bit, I would say that I'm starting from the basic, so from the 90s. So my wall is very old school, so small down pulling creams, and then some big slope. And honestly, I did a symmetric wall, so I can easily do both sides. I'm really enjoying. It's pretty fun. I already done bunch of sessions.
But so far you didn't change anything from your initial setting. For a week or so, you're enjoying the same setting.
Yeah, 2 weeks, and I did at least 8 or 9 sessions. Nothing changed. Maybe I'm gonna have something. I'm pretty happy.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I wish I could the wall at the academy, the spray wall at the academy, and Enrico can attest to this. I think I probably set and reset it. Like he'd come in every morning and I'd just be in the same spot, just taking holds off and then putting them back on.
You were painting. You were a Michelangelo. Painting art, of course.
But it was a very fun thing. Yeah, so I think maybe a takeaway from this conversation, going to right now and everybody's current situation with the difficulty, is like the creative process, maybe spending some time practicing what route setters are doing without a wall. Because even for me, I feel like the visualization aspect of seeing a climb, and maybe 3 months from now, I would like to keep some of these ideas that I'm having in the middle of the night, and so drawing them out and then seeing whether they still hold water like months from now, and I can set the boulder, or if it's just like I was just crazy and having a crazy dream.
Makes sense. We'll see. I witnessed.
Yeah, and for like another takeaway, the same is true for the athletes, for the climbers. I think now you could pick any climb that you have a video of yourself, and just lie on your back and visualize the climb, and then you compare how long that took you compared to your actual climb. You know, and it is certainly beneficial to do this kind of visualizations. And you don't need anything. You know, in the best case, you have a video of yourself on some project of yours, and you can, like in your mind, go through the moves. You will certainly benefit from that.
And I think something that's actually really cool as of recently for bouldering competitions in IFSC and going through the bouldering competitions is that new observation that they're using for the live broadcasts. If you guys like to show the boulder problems, if you guys know what I'm talking about, it seems like they're scanning like some 3D scan of the climbs, and when they're doing the route preview, and
online observation.
Yeah, really good. It's been a really awesome experience working with the kids sometimes, and I'll pull one up to be able to take, some of these online observations and do a route preview for yourself and think about how you'd climb it, seeing how you can actually get like a really good perspective on the wall and the wall angles, and then just watching the climbers go through and visualization, like practicing your visualization in that sense and being like, oh, well, I didn't think it was going to be able to climb like that. It's really awesome, like how much detail they get into all this stuff.
Yeah. And be a little bit tough on yourself, you know, that you don't look at what Tomoa did first and then visualize it yourself. I mean, this of course, I do this really often, that I put, you know, I pretend to have Tomoa skills and then I visualize something. Actually, that's most of the visualization I'm doing. But like, try to come up with ideas for yourself first.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining in again. Flo, thank you for joining us. It was awesome talking to you. Hopefully we can go back to setting soon and working together in the future.
I hope so.
Yeah, thank you, Enrico and Udo, for joining us again. We'll be back next week. I don't know what we'll talk about, but hopefully something else.
Look at my dog.
Ciao, ciao. All right, thank you guys.
Hello.
Have it for the rest of you. Have a good night, and Enrico, we'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao, guys. Have a good night.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, Ada.